Welcome, everyone, to Zoom into Books this afternoon. We have multi-award-winning author Don Helin with us today. Don has written a series of military thrillers that have won international awards. And he has also written a memoir and participated in an anthology of memoirs about the pandemic. And Don does a series of workshops to help others write their memoirs, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. The theme for today is structure of a memoir. So Don, welcome to Zoom into Books.
Well, thank you very much, Kathy. It's great to be here. I always enjoy these. And for everybody, this is our second memoir presentation. We did kind of an overview last time. And today I'd like to kind of dive in a little bit and talk a little bit about tipping points and structure and actually research. And so this will be able to take the next step, I think. Remember that novels are fun to read. I enjoy them, they're interesting. And over the long haul, I've learned if readers don't enjoy them, they'll put them down. I also learned that memoir, even though it's nonfiction, it's different for the writer. It's nonfiction, but it's not different for the reader. They expect a good story and they want a good story. And if you don't give them a good story, then it becomes, well, I think I'll put this one away. Just for a moment in background, Helin and I arrived here at Willow Valley almost 5 years ago. My goodness. At that time, I was a published author, but I didn't know much at all about memoirs. And prior to that, I'd had a 30-year military career, 3 tours in the Pentagon, overseas tours in Vietnam and Germany, and a number of state-tied posts. And after I arrived here, I heard incredible stories about what the residents had done. One good friend grew up in East Germany, and he got together with another buddy because they both wanted out. They were 18. Can you imagine that? They bought a kayaking kit, and for almost 6 months, they practiced in the basement in the dark, putting their kayak together and taking it apart. Then one night, one moonless night, they put their kayak together and sailed off. Would you believe that? They were picked up by a Danish liner who brought him into and dropped him off in West Germany. And that's how they got here. I thought that's incredible. You know, I think how easy my life was. All I had to do is get here from Minnesota. But then I have a friend who bought a baseball team after he retired, another who marched with Martin Luther King. But you know, it doesn't have to be spectacular. A number of friends who've written memoirs about how they met. Also, a lady came in one day to our class in a wheelchair. And I said, what kind of a memoir would you like to write? And she said, you know what I want to do? I want to write a memoir so my grandchildren know what I was like before I got stuck in this darn wheelchair. So it made me think how, hey, let's think about this memoir. And what is a memoir? Well, it's a journey. It's a journey through the writer's past. And it's not an autobiography, which is, of course, one's entire life, but it's what I call a slice of life. And what you want to do is find a place on your life story and put a picture frame around it. And that's what you can do to develop that memoir. But where on your life story? Where do you want to do it? Well, today we're going to talk about step 1, and that's research. You need to say it to yourself, well, what do I want to write? How would I write it? And what things would interest people? And you might have a story you want to share with your family. You might want to document your life, or you might want to set the record straight if you've had some trouble. So I think what you also need to do is do a diagnosis. In other words, do you want your memoir to be on a yellow sheet of paper, or do you want a 45,000 word memoir? You've got to decide what exactly you want. And then you have to say to yourself, do I have access to materials that I need? And how about, this is a tricky one, how about fallout from your family? Because remember, it's your story and you want to tell your story. And what we're proposing is make your memoir its accuracy of nonfiction, but use the storytelling tools of fiction. So your truth doesn't have to be stranger in fiction. Just borrow those tools, which include interesting, unbelievable characters, and you're the key, remember, realistic dialogue. And you want to break up that pages of your book with dialogue so it doesn't look like a college textbook. And the last thing you need is interesting setting. And my goodness, you're on your way. So where to start? I think that's the issue we're talking about today. And we start with research. You want to find out. Many people read memoirs to be transported to another time. Courtesy of the tour guide, that's you. And you know what? I like to think of it as a time travel. For example, one of my friends was at the Penn State University when Kennedy was shot. And she and her good buddy decided they were going to go to Washington, D.C. And between them, they just had the money for the bus fare and very little else. But they got on a bus and they went down there and spent the weekend down there. And I said, where did you eat? She said, well, these guys had a tuna fish sandwich and they shared half of it with me. And it was just kind of a story, but it's a story. And remember, roughly a third of the current population weren't alive at that time. So they have no idea what that was like. And what you want to do is make your world come alive, whether you're in Vietnam or the Pentagon, and you do this by small nuggets that are kind of interesting and that catch people's attention. As I heard residents' stories, I began to wonder about writing a memoir to tell these stories. Obviously, you need the research, but there's a difference. There's an important detail between research and what I call a rabbit hole. In other words, I have good friends who have written and studied and done research and never wrote a book. And they get stuck going in the research, and that's all they end up doing. So what you want to build from your research is what I call an inciting incident. Now, I got that from my writing novels. You know, my hero, Zach Kelly, and he always starts, his stories start with an inciting incident. And invariably, it's a bomb going off, a shooting, a robbery, something happens. So in a memoir, we don't call it an inciting incident, we call it a tipping point. And it generally occurs within the first chapter of your story. And it means something that's really significant for the main character. It will engage your character and your readers with the story, kind of serving as an indicator of what's to come. And you don't want to make it just the first event, but you want to make it a key thing. It might be a problem with your career. It might be an illness, a marriage, a new divorce, a new job, a divorce, a move, something to redeem your career. Maybe your protagonist has something to prove. So let's talk for just a minute about a tipping point. Like any story, a memoir has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Something must happen during that story. And this is why we always talk about a tipping point. And that's the moment or time just before something happens, perhaps a career-changing event or something like that, an event that triggers the story. And its main purpose is to give the main character a distinctive path to follow rather than just muddling through. Now, for those of you that have been with us for a while, you may well remember Voices from the Pandemic. We started this in 2020 when the pandemic was just hitting. And we said, what's the tipping point? Of course, it was the pandemic. And Kathy put out a call for 1,500 word memoirs about the pandemic. And I think, I forget, Kathy, I think it was 75 or 80 anyway that you got. And we willowed it down to 34 or 32, I think it was. And it actually turned out to be really a bestseller because people were really enjoying it. For example, it had healthcare workers. And, you know, the one that you'll know exactly what that was, she called it tidal wave, and it was a toughie. And we have singers. When the music stops, educators, students, dying patients, and the family couldn't go visit. Dating, I think somebody on our call today realizes what that was about. And another one, hello, your anxiety is calling, and that's multiplied by what's going on here. So that's where we want to do, and who knows, I'm not sure what we're going to do here, but it would be fun to at least think about another anthology if that's possible. Now, I'd like to compare our memoir to fiction, and I do that by creative nonfiction. Fiction is made up all the time. I do it all the time. A memoir, however, is a big difference. The writer, it's fact, but the reader hopes for a good story. And if you give them just something that's just dry and doesn't hold their attention, they're not going to stay with you. And let me repeat that. You've got to give them a good story. So you want to approach a memoir, not only what happened, but through the process of storytelling. Let me go back just a little bit. I was lucky when I got out of the Army. I had beginning to look for my next step. And of course, I found that there weren't a lot of people that were interested in hiring somebody who was really good at writing Army regulations. And then I spotted a advertisement for a travel writing symposium that was to be conducted by the Washington Post. And that's where I learned about creative nonfiction. And basically, when you write a travel article, you're trying to bring your reader into the story by the use of the senses and everything you can think of, because you want them to go to that place. You want them to visit. That's the whole purpose of travel articles. After we left Washington, retired, and we moved to Perry County, west of Harrisburg, and I spent almost 6 years as a travel writer until I decided to try to start writing fiction. And I was lucky. Penn Writers was a lot of help to me. And international thriller writers, I enjoy thrillers, had what they call the debut author program. And our coordinator was Lee Child. What a great guy he was. And that's where I got the idea for a series character. And that's how Zach Kelly was born. So they helped us a lot with mentoring and critique. So by the time I arrived at Willow Valley, I'd written a few novels. And now I'm working on number 9, and we'll begin drafting number 10. So let's look at creative nonfiction for a minute to use to bring the story alive. But you know, one of the things that I keep thinking of a tipping point is artificial intelligence. I wrote a book in 2020. I read an article by the CEO of Microsoft, who is just beginning to develop the artificial intelligence. And he had, I came up with the story, and of course, right in the middle of the election, you know how touchy all that was. We had high-level election officials mysteriously disappear from key swing states. There's a third-party candidate begins to really soar in the polls, and Zach uncovers a plot to use artificial intelligence to cook the books to win the election, to steal the election. And that got me thinking about artificial intelligence. And I got to thinking about what kind of a tipping point would that be? I don't think you can turn anywhere without hearing something. And some of the things I found, for example, the experts, and this was the guy who heads up the company that created artificial intelligence, is that they say the possibility exists that humankind risks extinction because of artificial intelligence. Mitigating that risk should be the public's response. And that was big. Then I got an article from a guy who he testified before Congress, who was the CEO of the company putting that out. And the senator that was chairing the committee had a talk to introduce things. And then he admitted that his talk was done by artificial intelligence using his voice. And he said, suppose rather than introducing this, I'd gone out and said, hey, we ought to abandon Ukraine. We want to support Vladimir Putin. Artificial intelligence is big. Now, another one I spotted was, can a chat box preach? And this was in Germany. The four chat boxes conducted an actual election. And for a lot of people, it can be very dangerous. A lot of people that have these very routine jobs, that can be a real challenge. But you know, as a writer, I thought, is that a big deal for me? And then what we did in our writers group, we put out some different questions. And it said, for the artificial intelligence, hey, can you answer this? And so one of the questions we asked was, write a 100-word story about a drone saving the day. Now just think about it. What would you write? Well, here's what artificial intelligence wrote. As the wildfire raged on, the firefighters were struggling to contain the flames. The blaze was spreading rapidly and the situation was out of control. Suddenly, a drone appeared in the sky, hovering over the inferno, equipped with our thermal imaging technology. It quickly identified the hottest spots and relayed that information to the firefighters on the ground. Thanks to the drone's precise mapping, the firefighters were able to deploy their resources more efficiently. And within hours, the fire was brought under control. The drone had saved the day, and everyone involved in the rescue operation realized it. And as we survey some of the publishers who are accepting short stories, we're finding that many of them are just absolutely overwhelmed because all kinds of people are sending their stories in, and they're stories that are written by artificial intelligence. And then I think the real punchline, I happened to look on my phone today, and maybe some of you saw it. Paul McCartney has hired AI to sing John Lennon's part of what will be the latest Beatles song. Can you believe that? So, you know, what can be crazier than that? So I think whatever we do, artificial intelligence is here to stay. And it's something that I think all of us should just think about. Can we write stories about what it's doing to us? I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. So now we've talked about a tipping point. We talked about doing our research. Now what? And actually what we want to do is begin to develop a structure. And that's where we are today. And the structure, what was the structure going to do for you? It provides organization to your idea. So your story is logical and dramatic. And it sounds simple, start with the problem and with the solution, but believe me, it's much more difficult than that. And there are two types of structure that you can use. One is chronological. And usually they suggest start with the most dramatic moment in chapter 1, and that might be the tipping point. And it's kind of the story of this happened, then that happened. You know, I graduated from college, and then I went in the service, and you kind of walk through your life. And some people use that. What I have found, it's really a little easier for me, and I think a lot of people that I know are using it, is the episodic approach rather than the chronological approach. And here you have just small incidents, and you can build on those. And it's a collection of stories that are grouped around a character or a theme, and then string them together in a series of vignettes. And the vignettes together tell a story. The best example I can think of right off the top of my head is LA Law. You know, each week there's a separate story on LA Law. Yet it's the same characters, it's the theme, you get to know and appreciate that. So what you want to do is think about how you want to structure your story. Because what you want to do right now is begin to think about what kind of a tipping point, whether or not you think it's artificial intelligence or it's something that you want to do or something that's happened to you or illness or whatever. And where are you going to start? And then how are we going to move forward? And I think let's look at an example. My own memoir starts out where I ended up with something that happened to me from Vietnam, an Agent Orange, and I had a medical problem. And I started to develop vignettes. And you know, when you're sick and you're not sure what's happening and all that sort of stuff, you say, suppose I had done something different. Now, I grew up in Minneapolis, and I didn't, not a lot of military up there. My dad was a Marine right outside of World War I, and he stayed in the reserves for 20 years. And he got me as I was about ready to graduate from college, high school, and he said, Don, you realize, of course, as soon as you graduate from college, you're going to be eligible for the draft. I said, okay. He said, after 20 years experience, I can tell you it's much better to go in as an officer than it is as an enlisted guy. So I went ahead and I went into ROTC. I became the campus commando. And actually, it turned out to be fun. It was extra work and stuff like that. And so when I graduated from college, then I had to go into the military right away. And so this is where I start with my issue of the road not traveled. I wouldn't have had to do that if I hadn't started out with the military. And I ended up going to Fort Carson and was part of the Ready. And this was right during the Cuban crisis, and almost ended up going to, as the Russians were bringing in the missiles. But fortunately, they were able to work that out. And then I turned out that the next thing was, things ran through my mind about all that. And after I graduated, and after that, I got orders to Germany. And it turned out that I couldn't go with my wife unless I extended another year. So I said, okay. So now I'm up to an additional year. And then when I came back from Germany, I had the opportunity to go graduate school. Well, that's kind of silly not to have somebody pay graduate school for you. But you know what? You sign up for every year you go. It's a year and 2 more years. So it's 6 years. And I woke up one day and there I was. You know, I had about 12 years. And then I was another chapter added to Vietnam. And that's kind of my series of vignettes of what happened along the way. And I was able to build this together into a really good package that I was very proud of. So what I want to do today is focus a little bit, rather than giving you more of an overview. I wanted you to think about research, whether or not it's very easy to pull out information on whatever. I happen to pick artificial intelligence because it's something that has kind of excited me ever since I wrote Missing, and what the possibilities are. So you could certainly do something, or each of us have different challenges that have met us over the years of things we want to do. And once you do your research, then you find that spot on the road of life and you kind of focus there. And remember, you want to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you do that with your structure, so that whether you have little vignettes or you use the other approach, either one will help a lot. So closing out this one, we hope to do another one probably in another week or 10 days. I know Kathy and I are headed to Chicago next week for the American Library Association conference. And then I'm very proud of my lovely wife, who will be going to the senior games because she qualified for both tennis and pickleball. So Her Sherpa as I go. But then after that, maybe we can get another one and we can start to talk about character. How in the world are you going to put together that character? Even though it's you, how are you going to structure it? And how is it going to fit into to your memoir? So Kathy, I wonder if we have some questions. Have you got any questions there?
Don, that was very interesting. We do have a question. I think most people, when they start to think about writing a memoir, is just what you said today. You have to pick a tipping point. And what do you suggest? The question is, how do I know where to start? And I think you had talked about before that a memoir does not have to be your whole life. Right.
That's a great question. And, if you're going to finish something, you got to start. And what I have found over time, for example, I don't know how many of you are dog people, but we had a wonderful dog for 16 years, and Max died last October. And man, I dragged around here looking like the guy that just dropped off a cliff or something like that. And I thought, I've got all these wonderful stories about Max. And so I put that together. And then I began to think, all of our family have dogs. And what is it that makes these beautiful animals so hard to lose? And so we did a survey of them all and came up with, not surprisingly, that's unconditional love. And so that has helped me a lot to deal with that. And then I think the memoir we did on the pandemic, that was a big deal. That was an international problem. And then you've got the issue of artificial intelligence. You've got other things going on. And I think it has to be something, it's personal. It has to be something that affects you. And that's what the tipping point, because it's supposed to deal with your life. And something with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I think that each of the people on here, I know, have been giving a lot of thought to memoir. Most of them are in our memoir class. and they're very good writers. So I have a lot of faith that they'll come up with it, but it's not easy. And once you get started, then you've got something going, but you got to get started. I hope that answered the question. If it didn't, I'd be glad to try to touch some more.
It did, and I would urge people to go to the Zoom Into Books YouTube channel and watch Don's workshop on writing creative fiction. That's a term that I was not aware of, and it's true. You want to, the pace of the book, the character development, it's just like writing fiction, but it is nonfiction.
Right.
Don, that's all we have time for today. I want to thank everyone who joined us on Facebook. This video will be available on Facebook. You can watch it anytime. And in the coming weeks, it'll also be available on the Zoom Into Books YouTube channel. So watch for the next installment of Don's memoir workshops in July, as he said. In the meantime, we're headed to Chicago for the American Library Association National Conference. I want to thank everybody who joined us, and we'll see you again soon. And thank you, Don.
Thank you. My pleasure. I really enjoyed it and appreciate you organizing it.
Sure thing.